Yes. I'm Connie Stolo. I'm the chairman of the Education Committee here at the Jenks Center. All the people that you see running programs around here are volunteers, as am I. And we are grateful for any help you'd like to give us because we don't get any support at all from the town. Justice Denied, a Personal Perspective, and it's presented by Margaret Yamamoto. She is a member of the family featured in the presentation and was incarcerated at the age of 2 months. Today she is co-president of the New England chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League, a national human rights and educational organization. She also was chair of the national organization's editorial board and was an ex officio member of its national board of directors. Margie has addressed many audiences on the subject of the Japanese internment during World War II, providing an historical summary of its events and relating their consequences to the personal experiences of her family as it coped with incarceration and subsequent return to normal life. She's retired after more than 40 years in the communication and public relations field, most recently including 18 years at WGBH, Boston's public broadcasting station. We handed out a list of books that you might be interested in reading about the Japanese American internment camps in California during the Second World War. If you don't have one, you can look on with someone else or borrow one from someone else. I think we've given out all the ones we have. So please welcome Margie Yamamoto.
Well, good morning, and thank you all for coming out on this gorgeous day. I know you'd rather be outside, but especially after the cold weather we've been having. Today, I'd like to share with you my family's story of immigration to America and our experiences before, during, and after World War II. You know, when I first moved to Massachusetts nearly 30 years ago, I found that most people knew little or nothing about what happened to us during World War II. In many cases, few people had even ever met a person like me. But today, thanks to movies, television, books, and the internet, the story of the World War II incarceration of Japanese Americans is being told. It's an important story that needs to be told to remind us of the fragile nature of the constitutional rights guaranteed all of us as American citizens, and how easily those rights can be taken from us. If you speak to any Japanese American today, you'll find that each has a unique and compelling story, and my family's story is just one of them. I'd like to start by giving you a very short lesson in Japanese. Get ready. We have specific words that describe the generations. The first word is issei, which means first generation in America. This is the immigrant generation. Next is nisei, the second generation. The nisei are the children of the issei. They were born in America and are American citizens. There are more generations after that. Sansei, yonsei, gosei, meaning third, fourth, and fifth generations. These words are based on the Japanese system of counting, ichi, ni, san, and so forth. They're words to describe the generations no matter how far back a family goes. These words, although Japanese in origin, can describe any people from any country. For example, do we have any issei in the crowd here? Oh, we have one. Good. Welcome. Any nisei? A few. Sansei, third generation. A few more. I'm missing some of you now. Yonsei, fourth generation?
From any country.
From any country. You don't have to be Japanese. Oh, I'm sorry, no wonder. Shall I start again?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Issei. Oh, wonderful. We got one more. We doubled our number. Nisei, second generation. Ah, good. You're like me then. Third generation. Oh. Okay, only in New England can I go beyond this. Fourth generation. Yonsei. Ah, 1, 2, 3. Gosei, which is fifth generation. All right, rather than go through the numbers, holler out how many generations if you go beyond 5. Oh, I guess we covered everybody. Okay, but you know, if I did this in California or anywhere away from the East Coast, most people couldn't go beyond the third generation, and we're lucky in that case. For today, though, we're going to be talking about the Issei and the Nisei. When my family was incarcerated during World War II, I was just an infant, and I really don't remember any of it, but I've learned a great deal through family stories, mostly told to me by my mother. We're going to see much of this story through her eyes, so let's start by meeting her. This is Kinoko. In Japanese, her name means child of silk. Here she is at the age of 9. She was born in Hilo, Hawaii in 1904. This is her family. Only an older brother is missing from the picture. Her younger brother, Yuk, is standing between their parents. He isn't smiling in this picture because he and his sister shared one pair of shoes, and guess who got to wear them? In the 1890s, her parents came to Hawaii from a small village in Japan near Hiroshima. They worked hard on the pineapple and sugarcane plantations, saved their money, and eventually started their own bakery, one that catered to the plantation workers. It was a family-run business, so all the kids were expected to help from the very beginning. Here she is attending Hilo High School. She's the middle girl in front. The year is 1917, and Kinuko's father died suddenly. Although she is only 13 and had 2 brothers, one of them older, it was she who was expected to quit school and work in the family bakery. This meant getting up every morning at 3 a.m. to begin preparing the baked goods that they sold. That was her routine until she turned 18. That's her with friends, the second from the left. In those days, 18 was the age of marriage, and someone had already approached her mother with a proposal for Kinoko. Being a rather modern young woman, her response was a loud and emphatic no. She told her mother, "I want to go back to school and learn something other than baking." She wanted to travel on big ships and see the world. Her mother laughed because at that time that was an outlandish wish for a young girl, a mere girl. But Kinoko persisted, and her mother finally agreed to send her to sewing school, where Kinoko promised she would learn skills that would make her an even better wife. By this time, her brothers were helping in the bakery, and she was able to go on outings with her friends. That's her in the white hat, sitting on the car running board in the middle of a sugarcane field. Kinuko's mother waited patiently, but in a few years, she again brought up the subject of marriage. But Kinuko still would have no part of it and wanted to travel on a big ship and see the world. She pleaded, if they would just send her to Japan, she'd learn the language and some of the more refined aspects of being a proper Japanese woman, and of course, an even better wife. To her surprise, she got her wish and sailed off on a big ship. That's her on the left. The year was 1924, when things American were very new and popular in Japan. She stayed with relatives in her parents' home village near Hiroshima. Once there, Kinoko found herself in great demand, teaching the Western style of sewing to women and English conversation to young men. She embraced the Japanese lifestyle and began wearing kimonos and perfecting her Japanese. She told me she got a kick out of being called sensei. Sensei is the title given professionals like teachers, doctors, and priests. And here she was, with just an 8th grade education, and everyone was calling her Sensei. She even found time to date. Now remember, this was in the 1920s, and in Japan, that meant bringing a chaperone. In this case, her teenage cousin, shown here in the middle. They'd start the date with her cousin in tow, and then they would leave her at the new cinema theater, and the couple would disappear until the movie was over. Unfortunately, all too soon, Kinuko's mother decided it was time for her to return home and get serious about finding a husband. So reluctantly, she returned to Hawaii. By now, she was nearly 26 years old. By the standard of those days, she was an old maid. Most of the men she knew in Hilo were too young, too old, or already married. Then, an unexpected letter from California arrived that changed everything. Her cousin wrote telling her, "I found a man for you." The young man was Sohei Yamamoto. He came to California in 1926 from a small fishing village in Japan. This was during the time of the Asian Exclusion Act that barred all Asians from immigrating to the United States. So Sohei sailed to Mexico and walked into California. Yes, he was an early illegal alien. When he met Kinuko's cousin, he was managing a Japanese grocery store in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles. When this cousin offered to be the go-between for the couple, he was interested. The first step was an exchange of photos. He had this one taken, one that reflected his more serious side, and sent it off. Meanwhile, Kinuko was having a bit of difficulty deciding what to send. She had that great picture of herself in a kimono, one that would probably delight the heart of any Japanese man. But that was not the message she wanted to send. She was independent and very American. So she settled on this photo, wearing a dress she designed and sewed, standing in the bright Hawaiian sun. The two exchanged photos and letters, and Kinuko found herself again sailing on a big ship, this time to California. She stayed with her cousin for a few months, and then, on November 5th, 1931, they were married. By the way, she designed and sewed her wedding dress. They were able to gather a few friends and relatives that they had in Los Angeles and had a wedding celebration. Many years later, I asked her how she felt marrying a man she hardly knew. She told me, "I didn't want to worry my mother anymore, so I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and I got married." They settled into their first home and enjoyed showing off their first car. Here they are on the left with Kinuko's cousin, the one who was the go-between for their marriage. As they began planning for their future, the year was 1931, and the country was in the middle of the Great Depression. Jobs were scarce and money very tight. They heard about a place in Los Angeles called Terminal Island, where there was work and opportunities for Japanese people. Terminal Island is an actual island. It's about 1 to 2 miles wide and nearly 4 miles long. It's located between San Pedro and Long Beach. And in 1931, there were no bridges to the island, only a ferry from San Pedro. The population was primarily Japanese and Japanese Americans who lived and worked there. The men of Terminal Island were fishermen. They fished for the tuna and mackerel that was so plentiful off the California coast. Their wives worked in the canneries, processing the fish they caught. Now, in the days before large-scale refrigeration, the canneries operated on an as-needed basis, 24/7. When a fishing boat came in with its catch, they sounded a horn that could be heard across the island, and the women came immediately to begin processing the fish. It didn't matter if it was 2 or 3 in the morning. It wasn't a surprise that the canneries provided housing for their workers and their families, making Terminal Island truly a company town. At its height, Terminal Island had more than 3,000 residents. Kinuko and Sohei opened a grocery store on the island to serve the many families who lived and worked there. Sohei spoke little English, so from day one, Kinuko worked by his side, ordering supplies and handling everything that required English. When I asked her about her hours, she laughed and she said, "We worked all the time." Soon they welcomed their first child, my sister, Shinko Shirley, born in 1933. Her Japanese name, Shinko, means child of God. They added 2 boys, my brothers Hajime James in 1936 and Tadashi Teddy in 1937. Hajime means first son, or the beginning, which is very appropriate in a Japanese family. And befitting a second son, Tadashi means loyal and faithful. The family quickly became part of the unique Terminal Island community. The island had restaurants, hotels, bars, stores, schools, doctors, everything needed to build a self-sufficient little town. In those early years, Sohei enjoyed taking my sister to community picnics. Many families also celebrated traditional Japanese holidays like New Year's Day, Boys' Day, and as you see in this picture, Girls' Day. That's my sister on the left being held up by invisible hands. Both Kinuko and Sohei worked long, hard hours in the store, and the boys were left in the care of their sister. Because it was such a closed community, it was safe for them to play anywhere, and there was usually an adult nearby. The family and the grocery store thrived. Sohei was able to expand the business to include a ship chandlery serving Japanese freighters and passenger ships. And that was an important point, as you'll hear later. But then, on December 7th, 1941, everything changed when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and the United States declared war on Japan. Terminal Island's location played an important role in what happened next. Let's take another look at that map. Here's Terminal Island. Los Angeles is directly to the north. An Army installation at Fort MacArthur was located in San Pedro to the west. And in 1941, a major naval station was being established in nearby Long Beach to the east. And Terminal Island was right in the middle. Within hours of the Pearl Harbor attack, the FBI descended on Terminal Island and began picking up community leaders and many of the men who owned commercial fishing boats. Because of the island's location and the men's access to boats, they were suspected of helping the enemy. Most of the men were Issei, first generation. Once they were taken, their families didn't see them again for months, and in some cases for years. Not a single one of these men was ever found to have committed an act of sabotage against the United States. Every home was searched by the FBI for contraband, and it was confiscated. That included things like cameras, flashlights, knives, even Boy Scout knives. There were stories of the FBI pouring out the family's soy sauce because it looked like liquid dynamite, and shredding sanitary napkins looking for secret messages. As America entered the war, the national press quickly began carrying stories and photos to inflame anti-Japanese sentiments. Unfortunately, these negative sentiments often spilled over onto the Issei and the Nisei, with headlines like FBI detains Japs considered risks as enemy agents. On December 22nd, just 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, Time magazine used an image of Admiral Yamamoto on its cover. He was the man who led the attack on Pearl Harbor. This is his photo, and this is the caricature they used on the cover. Inside was an article offering hints on telling the difference between the Chinese and Japanese to help you know where to direct your anger. The Japanese were described with words like dogmatic, arrogant, hesitant, and nervous in conversation. The Chinese, they wrote, were more placid, kindly, open, and relaxed. Life magazine also published its version of this story. The faces they used in the article were of a Chinese public servant in the top photo, and of General Tojo, the Prime Minister of Japan, on the bottom. There was a detailed diagram of both faces, and the Chinese were described as being relatively tall and slender with parchment yellow skin and a long and delicately boned face. The Japanese, on the other hand, were squat, had a massively boned head and face, flat nose, and yellow ochre skin. In the second set of pictures they used, we got a full body view of 3 tall, young Chinese brothers and 2 short, squat Japanese admirals. After these photos and descriptions, you can't blame the Chinese for not wanting to be mistaken for Japanese, or anyone else for that matter. But to make sure there were no mistakes, some Chinese began wearing armbands and buttons stating, "I am Chinese." The Japanese countered with buttons and store signs like this one stating, "I am an American." On February 2nd, 1942, almost every remaining adult Issei man on Terminal Island was taken into custody by the FBI, except for my father. Because he had been selling goods to the Japanese ships before the war, the FBI had already investigated him, and they didn't feel he posed a threat. On February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 that gave the military jurisdiction over the Western Military Zone. He signed it over the objections of Attorney General Francis Spittle and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, both of whom felt the order was unconstitutional and unnecessary. Here's an excerpt from that order. It stated, "I hereby authorize and direct the Secretary of War and his military commanders, who he may designate, to prescribe military areas from which persons may be excluded. And the right of any person to enter, remain in, or leave shall be subject to whatever restrictions the Secretary of War or the appropriate military commander may impose in his discretion." You notice they did not specify the Japanese as a target of the presidential order. This order was not rescinded until 1976 by President Gerald Ford. That means for 34 years it was still on the books and could have been enforced at any time against any political, ethnic, or religious group. Just 6 days after the executive order was signed, on February 25th, Terminal Island became the first area in the United States to be affected by that order. The more than 3,000 residents of Terminal Island were given just 48 hours to leave their homes and businesses and evacuate the island. At that point, with few exceptions, the only people left on the island were women, teenagers, and children. Despite the requirement of the presidential order that the transportation, food, shelter, and accommodations be provided those removed from an area, no provisions were made for their evacuation. No transportation was provided, no housing provided once they left the island. The only help came from family, friends, and churches. Like all the businesses in town, my parents had an evacuation sale, but no one wanted to be saddled with extra food when they were trying to save their possessions. We were fortunate that my father wasn't taken by the FBI because my mother was 8.5 months pregnant and she had 3 children under the age of 9. What they couldn't take with them or sell was lost. The fishermen's wives tried to sell their husbands' fishing boats. Eventually they had to abandon them. And they had to abandon their houses. A member of the American Friends Service Committee who helped the Terminal Island families observed, and I quote, "As night of the second day of the evacuation of Terminal Island drew on and the deadline drew ever nearer, little groups still toiled feverishly in an effort to load and move the last remnants of all the disrupted homes within the allotted time. The empty houses were dark as the electric current had been cut off. Unable to carry flashlights, which were contraband, the Japanese finished their tasks in the gleam of flashlights held steadily for hours on end in the hands of Caucasian friends who flocked to their aid. Overnight, Terminal Island became a ghost town. Our family moved into a rented apartment in Los Angeles, and on March 11, 1942, 2 weeks after the forced evacuation, I was born. I was the first baby in my family born in a hospital. The others were born at home, delivered by a midwife. My parents decided to call me Masumi Margaret, naming me after my grandmother and the child actress Margaret O'Brien. And I noticed at one point that they named my sister Shirley, and who was the child actress then? All of the Japanese, all of the Japanese on the West Coast were watching what happened on Terminal Island. About 1 month later, on March 24th, the first of a series of mass evacuation orders were issued to the rest of the West Coast Japanese population. 2 posters on the right gave specific instructions to the Japanese. The plan was to move all persons of Japanese ancestry out of the Western Military Zone as soon as possible. This involved 120,000 people. On this map you can see where the military established that zone along the western states from Arizona all the way up to Washington. Because it was impossible to build the more permanent camps quickly, the Japanese were first taken to temporary quarters in 15 assembly centers, mostly in California, where they were confined at racetracks and state fairgrounds. In 2.5 months, by June 5th, 1942, all 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry were removed from their homes in the Western Military Zone and placed in these temporary assembly centers. They were taken from their homes and instructed to bring only what they could carry with them. 2/3 of them were American citizens. They were taken from orphanages and hospitals. They were taken if they were found to have even 1/16 Japanese blood. They were taken regardless of age, from the very oldest to the very youngest. My family was sent to the Turlock Assembly Center in Central California. This is the intake area where our bags are being searched. We were housed in hastily erected barracks like the one in the background. But others were not as lucky and were sent to racetracks like Santa Anita. There they were housed in horse stalls that were barely cleaned and whitewashed and still smelled of manure. They were held at these assembly centers for several months while the permanent camps were being built. These permanent camps, euphemistically called relocation centers, were scattered across the United States. There were 10 camps located in California, Arizona. There are 10 camps located from California, Arizona, Utah, Idaho, Colorado, Wyoming, and as far east as Arkansas. The irony of this was there were Japanese already living in some of these states, and they were not imprisoned. From our assembly center in Central California, we were sent by train to a camp in Arizona. It was July, and the train was not air-conditioned. The shades were pulled down so no one could see us, and my poor mother had to contend with 3 restless children and me, a 4-month-old baby, at a time before disposable diapers. We arrived at Gila River, Arizona on July 28, 1942. The camp was located on 17,000 acres of Pima Indian Reservation land. It was located 47 miles southeast of Phoenix and 87 miles northwest of Tucson, in the middle of nowhere. We were told this would be our home for the duration. The area is often considered the hottest in the United States, with temperatures as high as 120. At its peak occupancy, the Gila River camp housed 13,348 people, making it the 4th largest city in the state of Arizona. Families were housed in tar paper covered barracks. A barrack was 20 feet by 100 feet long. For larger families like ours, it was divided into 4 living units, 20 by 25 feet in size, 1 family per living unit. What everyone who was there remembers were the ever-present sandstorms, as you can see in this sketch by Nisei artist Mineo Kubo. These hastily constructed barracks were made with green lumber that shrank in the hot Arizona sun. The sand invaded the barracks through gaps between the lumber, and my mother had to put layers of wet cheesecloth over my crib to protect me. The units were empty except for army cots. We were given empty mattress ticking to fill with straw for mattresses. Some of the more enterprising tried to make their quarters homelike with bedspreads and curtains ordered from the Sears catalog. Families with men who knew carpentry made furniture out of scrap lumber, while others just couldn't be bothered. The camps were built like military quarters with mess halls and separate latrines and showers for men and women. This also meant no privacy in the showers and toilets. The plumbing was just lined up on a wall. In the showers, the more modest women would wear bathing suits. The latrines were built military style, the toilets lined up in a row in one room. Here's another sketch by Mineo Kubo showing the partitions that were eventually built between the toilets in the women's area, and only after the churches intervened. They did not allow any doors, so the women tried to improvise their own. There were so many people that there were lines for everything. From mess hall lines to lines for the latrine and showers or to do your laundry. You might stand in some lines for hours. Because the internees had a wide collection of professions, some were offered jobs in the camps. No one was allowed to earn more than the average GI, so doctors, teachers, and other professionals earned $19 a month. $16 a month was paid for skilled labor, like camp cooks, although some of the people who had to eat in the mess halls would argue about skilled labor, and $12 a month for unskilled labor, like mess hall helpers. There were not many of these jobs available, so my father created one of his own. He had friends back in San Pedro send him fresh fish on ice, and he sold this to the other internees. After a mess hall diet, his fish was in great demand. Getting fresh vegetables was not a problem at Gila River, where we had one of the most successful agricultural operations of all the centers. Many centuries earlier, the indigenous Indians had developed a system of irrigation canals on this desert land. The internees reactivated the canals and turned the area into rich farmland. They grew more than 40 Western and Asian vegetable crops on about 2,000 acres and supplied all of the camp's vegetable needs. By 1943, life at Gila River was falling into a routine. But outside the camp, there were individuals who disagreed with what the government had done, and perhaps the most prominent among them was First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. Here she is visiting Gila River with Dylan Meyer, National Director of the War Relocation Authority, the body that oversaw the camps. Gila River was considered a model camp, and this was the only one she visited. Ironically, prior to her visit, all of the drab tar paper covered barracks were painted bright white, and she was greeted with welcoming smiles. You can't help but wonder if she saw through the illusion. It was with her help that a program was established that allowed Japanese American college students to leave the camps and continue their education. It wasn't until February of 1943 that the authorities decided to ask about the loyalty of the people they had imprisoned. All persons 17 years of age and older were asked to complete this loyalty questionnaire. It consisted of 28 questions. The last two caused confusion and anger in the camps. Question 27 asked, "Are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States in combat duty wherever ordered?" Those of draft age wondered if a yes answer automatically meant they were enlisting. There were many willing to fight, but some demanded that their families be freed from the camps before they would volunteer. They refused the draft. Women and the elderly Issei who could not fight wondered what would happen to them if they answered no. The younger Issei worried if they answered yes, they may find themselves having to fight against brothers and cousins in Japan. Question 28 asked, "Will you swear unqualified allegiance to the United States of America and faithfully defend the United States from any and all attack by foreign and domestic forces, and forswear any form of allegiance to the emperor, to the Japanese emperor, or any other foreign government, power, or organization?" For the Issei, who were not allowed by U.S. law to become American citizens, if they answered yes, they would become people without a country. The Nisei felt insulted they would be asked to forswear allegiance to an emperor in a country they'd never even visited. At the same time, the Nisei feared if they answered yes, yes to the two questions, and their parents no, no, the family would be separated. They were right. Those families and individuals who answered no, no were considered troublemakers and sent to a segregated camp on the Oregon-California border, where they were given harsher treatment. Some of those who refused military service were sent to prison. The loyalty questionnaire came as the government began efforts to form a segregated all-Nisei military team. Originally, all Niseis were classified 4C, or enemy aliens, and non-draftable, even though they were all American citizens. Eventually, the military recanted and began actively recruiting the Nisei. Some were assigned to the Pacific Theater with the Military Intelligence Service as translators. Others were sent to Europe as members of the legendary 442nd Regimental Combat Team, where their incredible bravery was honored with 21 medals of honor, the highest military honor possible. With a casualty rate of 314%, the men of the 442nd received more than 18,000 individual decorations, including 9,486 Purple Hearts. Purple Hearts are awarded those wounded or killed in action. By the war's end, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team became the most highly decorated combat unit of its size in U.S. military history, and are shown here being honored by President Harry Truman. While these Nisei were fighting in Europe and in the Pacific, many of their families were still being held behind barbed wire in their own country. Back at Gila River, the loyalty questionnaire was administered to my father and mother. They answered, yes, yes, anything that might give us an opportunity to leave the camp. By 1944, the government began to allow families and individuals to leave if they stayed outside the Western military zone and had a place to go and a job. My uncle in Denver had his own business and agreed to be our sponsor. This picture was taken just before we left Gila River on April 21st, 1944, and it's the only picture I have of me as a baby. Since our cameras were confiscated right after the war broke out, we have very few pictures from this period. When we left the camp, we were given a one-way bus ticket to Denver and $25 per person. So, from Gila River in southern Arizona, we joined my uncle in Denver in the business he started, canning Japanese pickles and other foods that were no longer being imported from Japan. He called the business the Denver Preserving Company. My uncle even set up a still in our basement, brewing sake illegally. I used to sneak down to watch it bubbling and was always afraid it would explode. But Dad always wanted to have his own business, and soon we were on the road again, this time to Chicago, where we opened a restaurant. My parents called it the Gila River Inn, so anyone coming out of the camps would find us. The war ended in 1945, and we were allowed to return to the West Coast the following year. So we packed up and left Chicago, made a quick stop in Denver, and moved back to Southern California. Dad joined his brother, who had moved his business from Denver, but kept the same name. He had moved it to Los Angeles. And Mom went to work in a sewing factory. By this time, Dad was in his mid-40s, and ever the entrepreneur, he and Mom saved their money and soon opened another grocery trade in the port of Los Angeles again. Dad restarted the ship chandlery and moved the business to San Pedro. This time, they called the business Yamamoto Brothers, hoping their two sons would eventually take it over. As the volume of Japanese ships coming into port grew, the ship chandlery business overshadowed the grocery store, and they moved it to a warehouse in Wilmington, close to Terminal Island. Today, the business looks a lot different. It's operated by my oldest brother, Jimmy, and Teddy has gone on to be a lawyer. My sister Shirley was widowed early and worked with Jimmy in the family business. As the business grew, Mom and Dad were able to travel. And in 1972, they went back to the small village in Japan where Dad was born. It was the first time he'd been back since 1926. When Dad didn't feel like traveling, Mom would take one of her kids and continue to fulfill her childhood dream to sail on many ships, big and small, and see the world. In all those years after the war, my parents never spoke ill of their camp experience. When Dad was 75, I gave him the only one I could find that was translated into Japanese. This was the first time he had seen anything like this in print in a language he could easily read. He had spent more than 33 years feeling the guilt and shame of our imprisonment and never saw anything that told him what happened to him was unjust. After he read the book, he asked me to please get him more books in Japanese like this one. He was ill with cancer at the time and passed away the next year. I was never able to find him more books. 12 years after Dad's death, the United States government passed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, granting reparations to Japanese who had been incarcerated during World War II. Watching President Reagan sign the act is Norman Mineta, second from the left, and Bob Matsui, third from the right. Both are Japanese-American men who had been in the camps as children and went on to become U.S. congressmen. Norman also went on to become Secretary of Commerce under President Clinton and Secretary of Transportation under President Bush. He was the first Asian American to serve on the president's cabinet. As a result of the Civil Liberties Act, we received an official letter from the sitting president and a payment of $20,000. This is a letter I received with my check in 1990. It's signed by George Bush Sr. The government began by paying the oldest Japanese first because so many of the Issei and Nisei were dying. Mom was 85 years old when she received her check. I was visiting her a few months after she was paid, and I asked what she did with the money. Now, in my mother's house, she had a Buddhist altar in the living room where she put pictures of deceased relatives. Whenever we had a family celebration or dinner, she always put some of the food there so they could share in the festivities. She took me to this altar, and there, resting against Dad's picture, was her uncashed check. She just wanted to be sure he knew. On her 88th birthday, our whole family gathered to celebrate, including her younger brother, Yuke, who was 84 and flew over from Hawaii. As you can see, this time, they both got to wear their own shoes. Her 4 kids were on hand, too. That's Jimmy on the left, the oldest brother who took over the family business. Teddy, the lawyer, is next to him. That's me when my hair was still all black. And finally, my sister Shirley. My mother died the year after this picture was taken. She was 89. Although my parents are no longer with us, their story continues. For you see, when a strong-willed young woman who wanted to see the world meets an adventurous entrepreneurial young man, together they can overcome any obstacles. We're fortunate they've left us with these stories. They've also left us with a large, multiracial, multicultural family that includes 4 children, 13 grandchildren, 21 great-grandchildren, 6 great-great-grandchildren, and many more stories to come. Our story is just one of the many to result from our World War II incarceration. We were lucky to emerge from this experience healthy and intact. Many others were not as fortunate. However, we share a single fervent hope that every American, regardless of age, wealth, race, ethnicity, or religion, will join together in making sure this never, ever happens again. Are there any questions? I thought I answered. And, oh yes. Poverty. I'm not sure. Oh, the question was, what was happening in Japan that caused so many people to immigrate? Most of the people who were coming over were working class people. And there was, from what I understood, a great deal of poverty going on. It was a difficult time. They may have been experiencing their own version of an earlier depression than ours. But it was with the hope of earning a lot of money, making a lot of money in America. They were told this country was, the streets were paved, this other stuff, and they were going to go back very wealthy and become the head man of the village they came from. But a great many of the immigrants were of the working class, because they came over too to Hawaii, a lot of them. Some came to Hawaii first and came to California. Yes?
We were in war with the Japanese, with the Germans as well. Do you know of anybody been treated, people of German descent, the same way as you
What
guys
happened to the Germans during World War II? They were a little more selective in who they were incarcerating during World War II, the FBI. And they did it more on a case-by-case basis. There were Germans put into sort of like POW camps if they were considered to be a threat. But it wasn't with the wholesale, if your name was German, you're going to be in prison. I have heard too of acts of violence against Germans in communities. You know, people who had just been living there their whole lives, and because they had a German last name, people were acting up against them. So, you know, no one was safe. I think it was the same way, though it wasn't with the Italians, because DiMaggio was big then, and you know, and they weren't going to imprison DiMaggio or his family.
DiMaggio's father's fishing boat was confiscated by the government, and some of the Italians and Italian Americans were sent to places such as Missouri. Others, like my dad's family, there were five oldest sons in the military, and the government went to their home and took the tubes out of their shortwave radio. So nobody was left. Then also, as close as South Woburn, there was an Italian service center, a polite name for a prisoner of war camp.
Did everyone hear what she said? Okay. Yeah, but it was not with the wholesale
Right.
sweep that they did with the Japanese Americans. I just don't want to be sad.
All their aid to the U.S. through Mexico, how and when did he become a citizen?
He never became a citizen. He did get a green card, and I'm not sure if it was because he married my mother, who was a citizen. You know, he passed away before I could get the details on all of this, and I'm trying to trace it, but it's very difficult right now because things were a lot more casual back then. And there must have been quite a few people sneaking in during the Asian Exclusion Act.
Hawaii was a protectorate of the U.S. at that time, wasn't it?
It was a possession of the Hawaii was a possession of the U.S., and anybody born in Hawaii was an American citizen. Yes.
I'm assuming from what you've discussed that your dad never learned to speak English?
He broke in English. It was very difficult for him because he stayed within a Japanese community most of the time he was here, and the business he did with Japanese ships and our customers in the stores were always Japanese. He didn't really have to speak much Japanese. And then he was married to my mother, who spoke fluent English and took care of everything that required English. He got spoiled. Most Japanese men do.
I was living in California during that time, and it's hard for us on the East Coast to realize how paranoid people were on the West Coast about the Japanese. Every day there'd be a rumor a submarine had been sighted off the coast.
Yeah.
It was they were really paranoid.
It was frightening at that time because immediately after Pearl Harbor there was a news blockage where no real news was coming out, and all that we were hearing was rumor. And some of the rumors included stories like the Japanese farmers in Hawaii had cut into their sugarcane fields arrows pointing towards the airfields. Also that some of the planes that had gone over Hawaii that were shot down, that some of the Japanese soldiers were found to have UCLA class rings, McKinley High School class rings. These were all rumors that were just coming out, and people were jumping on them. And yeah, it was frightening. And it's sort of the same. Think about what happened after 9/11 and the fear that was so widespread, and there were acts of racism against people who were of Middle Eastern descent or even South Asian, Indian people, because they wore a turban. There was actually a man in Texas who was killed. And it was because of 9/11. So it still happens today, and that's the frightening thing. Yes?
On the better side of it, though, I'd like to share with the group that my mom and dad and grandparents took in, we call them DPs then, and some of you may know that, displaced persons from Germany, and they lived in a little apartment in our home, and we did everything we could to assist them. It was a young couple and their children, and we fed them, we gave them clothing, and other people did likewise.
Where were you?
And this was here in Massachusetts, and they were German. And my husband's
Do you speak fluent Japanese?
I just got asked if I speak fluent Japanese. You know what my second language is? German. I lived in Germany for 3 years, and my German sometimes gets mixed up with a few Japanese words. I came home and started talking to my father, and I tried to speak the few Japanese words I knew, and I kept saying aber, which is but, you know. But no, I wish I understand as a child I spoke Japanese first, because I was in the camp, people were speaking Japanese, but I totally lost it. Another questions? Well, you've been such a great audience. I wish I had printed up more of those book lists, and I can send some more to Connie if it's a helper. Okay, and oh, and I just wanted to tell you about the book list. This is not a scholarly book list or anything. These are the books that I enjoyed reading, and that's why a lot of them are older books. And most of them on the front page are nonfiction. They're either autobiographical or historic books. The back page has fiction books. And just depending on what your interest is and how much you want to read, you might want to start with one of the fiction books just to get your appetite going. And then if you want to really read deeper into the whole story, read some of the books on the front page. Oh, yes.
I particularly enjoyed the hotel at the corner of Bitter and Sweet, which I just kind of accidentally fell into. And I just felt a relationship.
You should go to his website then, because the author's website, because he has a little video on it where he takes a tour of the hotel where all these things are stored. I hope it's still up. I'm sure it is. But it's really interesting because I think I tell you in the description of the book that the hotel at the corner of Bitter and Sweet, it was a real hotel. And there's a lot of Japanese families stored their stuff in the basement of the hotel when they went off to camp. And it just sort of sat there forever. So. Was our family able to recover some of our things? No, I'm just trying to think. No, there was one point in, I think, the 1950s when the government offered to compensate people for their losses, but you had to have receipts and things like this. And then when they did compensate people, it was like about 20 cents on the dollar. And
When I was teaching, I used to use the Dirty Topaz with my class.
the author of those books, she really writes some wonderful books. I'm trying to, Uchida.
Yes.
Yeah, Yoshiko Uchida, I believe. And she's written a whole series of books about the Japanese-American experience. They're mostly for young people and children, about growing up Japanese in America. And yeah, those I think I listed are all about the camps. But there are other books she's written about just the experience of being different, you know, in school. And the one book, Exile, I think, Exile is more of an adult book. It's an autobiographical book. Yes.
Is there a memorial on Terminal Island, and what is there now?
We were just there the last time we were in California, as a matter of fact. There is a memorial. Every year, there's a group of former Terminal Island people who have a reunion. And I've never been to one, but I joined their former Terminal Islanders group just so I can get their newsletters. And they took contributions to put a memorial up on Terminal Island. But right now, it's a federal prison. on Stone Island. After the war, they leveled all those houses where people were living. And I'm not sure what they did with it. I think early on it became a prison, the island itself. I saw buildings there, and I wasn't sure what they were. I asked my brother, and he couldn't tell me either. But we did drive to where the store used to be located. We thought where the store was located because the streets kept their names, like Tuna Street. You know, I mean, there's this really interesting little part of San Pedro's history. But there is nothing there except for that prison that I'm aware of, and that memorial right near the bus stop to the prison. Any other questions? Okay, thank you for all very much.